Don't try to be normal. Try to be who you are meant to be. In other words, don't compare yourself to any, mythological standard of normality, whether it's established by the mental health profession or by the entertainment industry. Find out who you are and be that.
It's time for the SHAIR Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host,
On today's episode of the SHAIR Podcast, we have Don St. John joining us, the author of Healing the Wounds of Childhood. In his book, Don shares his personal story and discoveries about what our bodies, our minds, ourselves, and our relationships need in order to heal from the wounds, the traumas, and the toxic stress of life. He also takes us through his own battle with addiction and his journey into recovery. Don himself has spent over 45 years engaging the process of becoming whole, both personally and professionally, as well as in his own relationships. What does it mean to be a whole human being? What is wholeness? This interview goes into a lot of different directions. We discuss a lot of what went on in Don's childhood, in his marriage, in his current life, and how he used those experiences to write this book and to also help others as a psychotherapist, relationship therapist, and somatic therapist. So let's dive right in. But first, if you would like to know the best way to show your support for the SHAIR Podcast, here are a few ways you can help. First, go to www.theshairpodcast.com, and there you can sign up for our free newsletter, which will let you know every time a new episode of the SHAIR Podcast comes out. You can leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. If you would like to know other places that you can listen to the SHAIR Podcast, you can listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. If you would like to donate to the SHAIR Podcast, you can do so via PayPal, or you can support us on Patreon. We have a thriving Facebook group that grows daily and has massive participation. Again, it's a private group, so if you would like to discuss recovery, share your experience, strength, and hope, help others, or lean on others for support, be sure to join the Facebook private group. And all of this information can be found on the website. So go to the website, and there you will find all the information that you need to help support the show. So now a quick message from our sponsors, and on to the show. Sober Nation is the largest online recovery community and treatment resource center. They provide treatment resources to those struggling with addiction, as well as to the family members who are caught in the crossfire. On top of that, Sober Nation is a huge community of good people who share their experience with each other. They have informative content, recovery and addiction news, as well as an entire clothing line which helps expand the culture of recovery. They can easily be found at www.sobernation.com. Sober Nation is putting recovery on the map. And finally, would you like to receive the most popular AA daily devotions free in one distribution? Transitions Daily delivers daily devotions from the 24 hours a day, AA Thought for the Day, Daily Reflections, Big Book Quote, Just for Today, As Bill Sees It, plus more. You can get our distribution daily via email, private Facebook group, or Twitter. Go to dailyaaemails.com for more information. And don't forget to share dailyaaemails.com with friends in meetings and with sponsees in recovery. Now back to the show. Hey, Don, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on the show today. How are you feeling today, brother?
I'm feeling great, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I love it. Me too. Lots of really cool stuff. As a matter of fact, folks, today we have Don St. John joining us on the SHAIR Podcast, the author of Healing the Wounds of Childhood. In this book, Don shares his personal story and discoveries about what our bodies, our minds, ourselves, and our relationships need in order to heal from the wounds, the traumas, and the toxic stress of life. Sounds riveting. So
I thought so.
Good. All right, so let's dive right in. Don, tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write this book.
Well, I thought my story was important to tell. Oh, my beginnings were rather horrible, and I was on a trajectory leading to a very destructive life and early death. There was really no question about where I was headed. I was able to turn it around and turn it around dramatically. So I feel like I'm not even the same organism that I was, say, 45 years ago. And I'm 73 now, so gives you a perspective.
Well, you look fantastic, brother. I saw you on the back of the cover of the book, so you keep yourself in really good shape. What's your normal routine look like on a daily basis? Yeah, diet, exercise, stuff like that.
Well, I begin most days with the meditation and the movement, the yoga-like movement process. It's called continuum. It's based on the premise that the human body is mostly water, and we can learn to move fluidly. And I do that almost every day, and I meditate and I pray, and I eat a rather healthy diet. I try to walk about 3-4 miles every day. Whenever I get an opportunity to dance, I do that. And my wife and I are both 73, but we're still very much interested in each other as male and female, to express it euphemistically, if I may.
Yes.
And I play golf. I took up golf for the first time when I was 69 years old, 4 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're brand new to this?
Yes. It's not an easy game, but I'm loving it.
No, I wouldn't imagine that. I've tried my hand at golf a few times, and it's not easy. As a matter of fact, I threw a couple of golf clubs across the court in my time. This was prior to recovery. So maybe I'd have a little bit more patience and tolerance.
It takes a great deal of patience and tolerance. I consider it part of my spiritual practice, because you really have to develop the qualities of patience and determination, especially starting a game like that at almost 70 years old.
Yeah, that is incredible. You did mention a healthy diet. Is it any one diet in particular, or do you just watch your calorie intake?
Well, it's paleo-like, let me say. It's not strictly any particular dietary regimen, but I don't eat much red meat at all, and I try to eat a lot of vegetables and fruits. And, I grew up eating a very heavy Italian diet, and I love all of that, but discovered that my health was just more important, and to feel good. And I think this is an important point for recovery, to feel good in one's body, because often we use substances to try and feel good, literally feel alive, tranquil, engaged.
Absolutely, yes, we do. And you do the same thing with food.
Right, correct.
The reason why I ask is part of my recovery today has been shifting my diet. So I've cut red meat, chicken, dairy out of my diet. I've been trying to incorporate raw plant-based food into my diet daily, at least once during the day, if not more. Usually in the morning it's easier, but I try and have at least some sort of a larger salad throughout the day, and just limit the amount of, well, not just limit, but I've cut all the fast food out. I've cut all the processed food out. And so I would say that, my diet is primarily plant-based. So I am concerned. I want to look like you when I'm 73.
Well, it sounds like you're doing the right things, because I think it's important to take care of ourselves at every level. And I think that's one of the things that my book gets into is, I think the culture has a lot to learn about what good self-care is. Realize that it's only in recent years that we even consider food as important to health. It's only been in recent years that we consider exercise important to health. And from my perspective, that's just the beginning. There's a lot more to take into account, and especially when one is in recovery and wants to, continue to grow, continue to become the person that they're designed to be, that they can be.
Absolutely. Which good. Well, in that case, that'll help us segue into your story. And, we're going to do things a little bit differently, folks, because Don's story is a little different than most of ours as far as his journey from where he was dysfunctionally as a human being and then his journey into recovery. So we're just going to jump right into your story. So Don, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to tell us your story, where it started out in the beginning, because how your book was developed was probably from your childhood and then evolved into how you recovered from the trauma in your life. So just tell us your story and then segue into the battle with drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, your rock bottom moment, and then as you started to journey into recovery and into the book. So Don, take it away.
Okay, well, I'll start with my parents. On one hand, from one perspective, I can say they should never have married. They acted as if they intensely disliked each other. The only engagement, and it was constant, was really bitter arguments. And my father was very withdrawn. My mother very aggressive, and she started swinging at me before I was a year old.
Oh, wow.
And pretty soon it became part of my daily life until I was big enough to physically stop her at 15. The story goes, I don't remember this moment, but the story is I reached up and took my first drink of whiskey when I was 3 years old. It was always on the table. My uncles would be over frequently, and, there was always beer and whiskey, and I was very much into it, always wanting to get what I could. Well, to make the long story short, when I was in the Air Force in the early 60s, and my high school sweetheart sent me a Dear John letter, it pretty much sent me over the edge, and I was drinking. It would have been much more serious had I not usually awakened with intense migraine-type headaches, and I would stay away from the bottle for about 2 or 3 days.
Right.
But then I'd forget the headache, and I would go back to it. Well, one night, I was in my 4th year of the service. I was in the Air Force, and one morning, it was about 5:30 in the morning, I woke up in the back seat of my car, and I was bleeding from my throat. Blood was coming out of my mouth. I felt as sick as I ever had in my life. All I could remember is that we'd started drinking early the night before, and we were drinking until the wee hours of the morning. And it scared me. It really scared me because I didn't know how serious it was. But I took myself into the military hospital, and fortunately it wasn't too serious. But it scared me enough to look in the mirror and say, you need help. I mean, I was doing it much, much too frequently. I was being, I'd be picked up in the gutter by an air policeman, and they'd drag me back to my barracks, toss me in bed, and I'd wake up and have to go to work with this serious headache.
Hey, wait, Don, real quick. How'd you get your neck cut?
My neck wasn't cut. I had burst vessels in my throat because I was whooping and hollering like a crazy guy, just out drinking.
Oh, okay.
3 in the morning, and, I was 21, and all that, the aggression, the pain, everything that it was bottled up inside, it would always come out when I drank. I almost strangled a roommate of mine with a broom handle once. And, 4 or 5 guys came rushing into the room, pulled me off, hit me in the jaw to try and calm me down. That kind of occurrence was getting more and more frequent. And, I looked in the yellow pages, found a psychiatrist, and went in to see him. And he stuck me in a group. And that was the first step of a journey of changing my life dramatically. But it was a process because I kept drinking for, another 10 years, not as frequently. And I managed to get myself into college and graduate school, even though I would have episodes in college and graduate school going out and getting drunk. But I was able to, keep it to the weekends, maybe once, maybe twice during the week. But I was functioning. So you might say I was a functioning alcoholic at that time.
Right.
There are lots of those folks around. And I was fortunate in being able to admit that I needed help and continue to look for it. And then around 1968, someone introduced me to marijuana, and I found that to be a much more enjoyable substance. Once again, I was doing it every day, and I was pretty hooked to it. But I didn't get into the same kind of trouble that I would get into when I was drinking.
Absolutely. It's a different high.
It's a different high. Again, one step led to the other. At one point, I started studying a psychoanalyst by the name of Wilhelm Reich, R-E-I-C-H. And he pretty much said that if you really want to change a person, you got to change the body. And I got enchanted by that idea, and I went out in pursuit of changing my body. And I don't know if you've heard of Rolfing or any of these somatic disciplines. There are...
Isn't Rolfing something very painful?
Not necessarily. It can be intense. It depends on 2 things: what you're carrying in your body and who's doing it. But it's one of the new, what I call somatic disciplines that helped me enormously because, let me set up a scenario. Imagine that you're a movie director or casting director, and you're looking for someone to play the part of a young man who was seriously abused by both parents in different ways.
Okay.
Emotionally violated, physically violated. And okay, so your job is to find somebody to play that part. Okay? Now, what comes to mind? And I can guarantee you it's not Sean Connery or John Wayne or, right? Mm-hmm. When you think of somebody who's suffered those experiences, their body is profoundly affected. Mine was collapsed. My shoulders caressed my ears. My chest was sunk, so breathing was very shallow. In other words, it was simply difficult to feel good in my body.
Okay.
I think this is an important, and I talk about this a lot in my book, because it works against. One can have a spiritual awakening. I have a friend who's had a spiritual awakening and got her off drugs. She was really in a bad way, and it got her off drugs. But she's trying to feel good, and boy, it is hard. Part of that hard is she doesn't have enough freedom in her tissues, in her breathing, in her movement. And so that works against the intention that's established in her spiritual awakening. I don't know if y'all are following me or not. Ask questions to clarify this if you'd like.
I'm following along because I guess in my mindset, it's the amount of pain that I am already experiencing in my life, that this process of pain, I guess using pain to get through pain. Am I understanding this correctly, or am I off base? Am I following you wrong?
In terms of Rolfing,
yeah.
you mean? Structural? No, not at all. That's a misconception that was established in its early days because it was a little brutal back then, but it's been so refined that many, if not most people, don't find it painful at all. There might be places and moments, but, I did that as part of my practice for 20 years, and very, very few people complained of pain. It could be quite intense, but...
Can you tell us a little bit about what that process is like?
Yeah, if you were looking at someone doing it, it would look a little bit like deep massage.
Okay.
But each session has specific objectives, like, for example, opening up the chest, balancing the legs, opening the sides of the body, objectives like that. So that's why it's called structural integration. The overall purpose is to see our body by design is meant to become vertical. And by design, it's fairly fluid. It's 70 more or less % water.
Right.
Okay. But most human beings, because of our lack of understanding and just simply where we are in the evolution of our consciousness, most human beings don't know that and very often don't come close to that sense of a balanced, integrated body.
Okay.
And that work is designed to help that direction, to help the person move in that direction. And I think it played a huge part in my recovery because, if you look at me now at 73, I look much more together physically. You wouldn't pick me for that part. You wouldn't pick me to play that role of somebody who's been abused and beaten down. You would have when I was 25. But at 73, I don't look that way at all. And Rolfing, structural integration, was one of the many things that I did along the way to help me feel better in my body.
Now, real quick, because
Sure.
One of the women that I interviewed, her name is Nikki Myers. She is the founder of Y12SR, and that is Yoga for 12-Step Recovery. So one of her slogans is, the issue is in our tissues. So would you say that this Rolfing process, this sort of deep, intense massage techniques, these openings, the chest openings, the hip openings, things of that nature, does that release, I guess, either chemical imbalances, toxins? Am I close to what it is that you're describing here?
It's very similar in objective, I would bet you, as is the yoga that Nikki does. Okay? Because what she's saying is, give me that slogan again. What's in the tissues?
The issue is in our tissues.
Yeah, the issue is in our tissues. You see, that understanding, generally speaking, there are several different approaches out there to help us release whatever's being held in our tissues, including patterns of, let's take someone, who has felt defeated most of their life. And now they're 40 years old and they don't want to feel that way anymore. They want to go out and kick butt and make a different life for themselves. Okay?
Yep.
But that attitude of defeatism has become, over many years, embedded in the tissues.
Yes.
The body looks like, you can look at a person, right? That's what we're saying. And whether you're approaching that through Nikki's yoga or Rolfing or Feldenkrais or, any of the other things that I mentioned in the book, they're all aimed to restore the body's natural state, more natural state. I think that's one critical dimension. Another dimension is spiritual. And in my story, in about 76, I had an experience with a teacher. He was a spiritual teacher in Los Angeles. He would do these 10-day conferences. And I had an extraordinarily powerful experience in the course of those 10 days where I have experienced a kind of love that I had not known before. And that was love that was not attached to any particular object. It was just the experience of my heart. Like, whoa. And, I had out-of-body experience. I was having all these experiences in this conference. But the main one was this sense that there's a power bigger than me, and that power has something to do with love, and that's a guiding, orienting power, and that it was with me all my life. Even, throughout the craziness of my childhood, somehow I was guided to that moment, and in that moment, in 1976, I could look out and for the first time in my life see a very positive future. I didn't know what it was going to be, but it was clearly one of those moments where I knew my life would be different, and it's been upwardly spiraling ever since.
And so what was there's always that moment, you're talking about here, that spiritual awakening. There's something that provokes it or evokes it. What was that moment?
It was emotional pain. Here's what happened. Let me tell you the story. I was up there 2 days at the conference. It was about a 2.5-hour drive from where we lived. I was married. It was my second marriage. And my wife called. She said it was urgent that she speak to me. She drove up 2.5 hours and said, and I quote, "I want to have an open marriage, and I've begun."
Whoa.
Yeah, whoa.
Oh, this is a very important part of the story.
Yeah.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah. Well, you want to know what provoked that
Let's
experience, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it gets better. So I said, "Anything else you got to tell me?" And she said, "No." I said, "Well, thank you." And she drove 2.5 hours back home. That night, the teacher turned all the attention of the group to me. And they just held me and supported me, and it was great. So I had that holding. The next morning, we got in circle, and he started this speech essentially saying it's time to let go of the emotional realm. From here forward, we're moving into heart consciousness. Either you're willing to take that leap or go home, I'll give you your money back. You've got until this evening to make up your mind. And, I went berserk. I said, you got to be kidding.
Yeah, right?
Right? Let go of the emotionality and, yeah, right. It was the most intense day. It was really, so I was bouncing off the walls when all of a sudden, it was as if the doors of my heart just opened. And I felt in the midst of all that madness, I felt love, just love. And I said, holy Christ. No pun intended there.
No.
Holy Christ, how can this be? What is this? And when I went into the group that night, I said, I'm in.
Wow.
And what happened for the rest of the next 7 days? The pain, it's not like it all went away, but it would come and it would go.
Mm-hmm.
And it was being held in a different context. It was being held as if, with just a higher place.
What was this group you were a part of?
It was just about 16, 20 people a lot of psychotherapists, a lot of body workers. This man, he was a medical doctor who got sick and went on a spiritual quest for a couple years in India and came back teaching. And his name is Brew Joy. He's got a couple books out. He's now deceased. But, yeah, he was a very powerful teacher. And he was able to elevate the vibration of the group so that I could have that experience. And in the midst of this intense, dramatic emotionality, realize the presence of a higher power. That was my higher power moment.
Beautiful, man.
And my life got better and better. Just kept getting better. It took a while. There's some work still to be done. Still is. But, I couldn't ask for a richer life at this time. I mean, I'm so grateful.
No, I can only imagine. But that's just the beginning there, because you're just at the precipice, at the beginning of your journey. I don't even know how far along before the book came. I don't know how from that moment when the book started to evolve. But, from that moment, right? Did you divorce from your wife?
Yeah, 2 weeks later, it was a very amicable divorce. She left town, but we stayed in contact, and it was very pleasant. I mean, in that group, I could see the perfection of that divorce. And somehow she realized it as well, and we parted ways. And the book evolved from there in the sense that everything that I found helpful for myself, I tended to get trained in. Like I trained in structural integration, a particular school of it called Hellerwork Structural Integration. I trained in 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of psychotherapy. I trained in movement work. And, I had all these different trainings, all these pieces, and put the book together because, most books tend to focus on one area, be that neuroscience or communication and relationships. And mine is kind of a resource book that surveys all the things that I found valuable for myself.
And it does. It talks about, or at least right there in the beginning, you describe how discovering what our bodies, our minds, ourselves, relationships, and then healing these wounds of the traumas and the toxic stresses of life. So then as we, that's kind of a mouthful there, but in general, that's the premise of the book. All right. So you've already kind of gone into, the first stages, the Rolfing, then your spiritual awakening, and then you've taken different turns. What was that turning point in your life when you decided, I'm putting this all together and I'm writing a book?
Well, that went like this. I started graduate school in 1967, and I was a pretty conventional thinking psychology student going into graduate school. 3 years later, after 3 full years of graduate school, my master's thesis, my clinical work, I decided that if I had a puppy dog who needed counseling, I didn't have a single professor that I would trust the dog with. So I left. I went to California in search of the real stuff. And, the book chronicles all that real stuff. And somewhere around 2000, I said, one of the regrets in my life is that I never finished that PhD. So I found a school that both required some real work, at the same time allowed me to do what I was interested in, and I completed my PhD. And once I completed that dissertation, I thought, now I should turn this into a book. And it really changed dramatically from the dissertation to the book and took a few more years. But that's how the book went. There's a point that I want to make because I've worked with a lot of people in recovery. And a lot of people will come in and tell me that they had pretty good childhoods. Okay? No, there was no abuse and, a number enough for it to be striking, to get my attention. I haven't kept track of numbers, so I can't give you percentages, but just enough to get my attention. Where people would say, I had a good childhood. My mother and father were there. They were there, Here's what I think is really, really important to know. There's an emotional nutrient. You're paying attention to your diet right now, right? Realizing how important getting the right vitamins and minerals and nutrients are.
Yeah.
There's an emotional nutrient that not too many people know its importance, and that is to have someone who can be emotionally present with you, who can look you in the eye and see you and let you know that they see you, look you in the eye and appreciate you and let you feel their appreciation coming into you. In other words, real contact. I call them felt love moments. Those moments when you're really with somebody.
Uh-huh.
And, you just feel the resonance. It's a resonance. It's a vibratory resonance. And I'm really glad that you know them. Because so many people have no idea what I'm talking about. And then when I attempt to reach them in that way, connect with them in that way, they invariably ward it off because there's so much pain around not receiving it.
Mm-hmm. Right? They're guarded.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the roots of addictions, that people kind of are starving for that real, authentic relationship where you feel like in moments in time, in real time, you feel gotten, you feel seen, you feel appreciated, you feel valued, you feel loved.
So you've worked with various people that are struggling with addiction. And
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now this is a curious topic, and I want to jump into that a little bit further. So let me ask you this. Let's say you have someone that you're explaining this to, and they tell you, well, I have no one that sees me. What would your suggestion be to them? In other words, they say, find someone that sees you, and they say, I have no one.
Well, is this person my client, or is this person...
Yes, yeah, let's say they're your client. Because here's the thing. At the stage where I was at, when I hit rock bottom, okay, I had burnt every bridge. I was so alone. My wife had kicked me out of the house. My friends wanted nothing to do with me. And I just felt, alone, right? And I didn't feel like I could come to someone and say, I really need to connect with you because I was so far gone. And remember, this is very, very, very early in recovery. This is, few days sober, and everyone that I knew hated me, because I'd done so much wreckage and damage, right? So trying to connect with someone in a symbiotic relationship where one is giving back to the other. And I'd spent so much time taking, I say, dude, I have no one. I have, no one sees me. I've got no one that I can sit with and will listen to me. What direction will you send them to?
Well, if they're my client, I send them in the direction of me, because what I do in my work is to do my very best to bring all my presence to that relationship and do my very best to find what's lovable, what I can appreciate, what I can value, what I can reflect in a positive way to the person in front of me. Typically that makes them uncomfortable.
Yes.
And then we have to work with that. We have to help the person to grow the capacity to let somebody love them.
Absolutely. We say in recovery, we'll love you until you learn to love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's so many instances where they can't see past the dysfunction of their lives, the mistakes that they've made. When you remove the drugs and alcohol from the equation, they're left with their thoughts, with their minds, with their feelings, with their emotions. And they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so even just tapping them, touching any sort of a nerve can bring a tremendous amount of pain. So in many cases, yes, I see you. You come into, for example, being that I come from a 12-step fellowship, I come from 12-step recovery, we see you. And your head's down, you're beaten, you're lost, you're scared.
Mm-hmm.
I've got nobody. Well, you got us. All right.
Right.
So there's nothing that you can't tell me. There's nothing that you haven't gone through that not one of us here can relate to. We can all relate to the road you've been down, which is why I was asking the question, just in understanding what someone who is so far down the rabbit hole, basically, how you connect with them. And it is, you disconnect so much. Addiction is a disease of disconnection. You disconnect so much. It wants to isolate you, get you alone, and then kill you. I mean, that's
that phrase you just used, a disease of disconnection. I think that's where it starts. No, not enough connection, real connection. And one of the things that challenges people, is that to face that, sometimes they feel like they're being disloyal to their parents, because maybe their parents, did the best they could, gave them everything they could, but starved them in a particular nutrient. And to face that can be tough. But, that attitude of we're here for you, I think is one of the big healing components of the 12-step programs. There's somebody who's there for them.
Correct.
For each person.
Yes, there's no question about it. And so, our listeners, the ones that are listening to this episode right now, what can you tell them? What aspects of your book, what is it that you would tell our listeners? You would say, this is what I think you would get out of my book.
Well, I think first you would get a very good resource book. You would learn about some of the things that are available in most major cities, not all major cities, that could support you in your process. I think there are a number of chapters throughout part 2 of the book that summarize in as clear a way that I could possibly have done it, resources that could support you. I think the other thing is that you'll get a perspective about all the areas of human beingness that are affected by the traumas, the insults, the hurts of life. Because I kind of go through chapter by chapter, our bonding capacity, for example, our belief structure, for example, our neuropsychological mechanisms that handle tough situations and that determine whether something is overwhelmingly stressful or just a fun challenge, for example. Those are the kinds of things I think you would get out of it. And the other thing is, if you look at a story like mine, one of my hopes in writing it is that the reader will come away with, boy, if given a background like that, if he could lead a very thriving, rich life, I sure can too.
Many of us have those stories. We have these unbelievable stories of wreckage and a tremendous amount of pain, which is actually, what interested me so much about your book, the title, which is Healing the Wounds of Childhood. What wounds did you have to heal from yourself from childhood?
Oh, okay. I would say, and this is a very common wound. In my case, it was extreme, but it's not uncommon. And that is the very deep down feeling that there's something very, very wrong with me. Now, that wound, in my case, the abuse was explicit. It was statements like, "You and that no good son of a bitch father of yours ruined my life. When are you ever going to do something right? You are ugly. If I catch you doing this, I will kill you." It was of that nature. But on a much more subtle level, if a child doesn't get what he or she needs, and usually it's a high dose of presence, somebody who's there, somebody who can really be there, it feels bad. And that feel bad gets translated as I am bad. And that's a huge wound. Because if I feel like I'm really bad, then it's hard to open up and let you see me.
Right.
Because you're going to see how bad I am.
Right,
so I stay closed. I stay closed. You don't see me. That exacerbates the wound. You see, it's a vicious cycle then. I think that's one of the most pernicious wounds. It's shame. It's that feeling that somehow we're deficient, somehow we're defective.
Yes, absolutely. And I can relate 100% to that. I grew up in an environment similar to yours, not with the beatings. My mother we would get regular spankings. I probably still have marks on my rear end from the belt, but there wasn't, beatings per se. But there was, my parents spent 33 years married. They hated each other. The constant in our lives was that they fought. They slept in different bedrooms. They had a life that they decided that it was less complicated to get a divorce and live together in this misery. So they didn't realize that that's what we would be raised around and what we would see. And also just the fact that, my father was tough on me. He didn't know how to, maybe it was because I was a guy and he was trying to be tough on me. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of compliments. It was more of, a lot of negativity or, I can't believe you did that again. You're such an idiot. Things of that nature where you just, over the years, it just becomes a constant and you start to believe it. You start to believe. And you create these limiting beliefs about yourself.
Absolutely.
You're not good enough, and that as you navigate through the world, you carry this with you. You carry this baggage with you. So dropping all of that negativity, man, for some of us, no wonder we use so many drugs and, drugs and alcohol come in the picture because it's impossible to relieve it on our own. The drugs and alcohol immediately allow you to drop those rocks.
Right. Feels good. And so we have to learn to feel good without it.
Yes. And so I guess that's where, I'm segueing into or, trying to extract from your story, which is just that. I mean, in your book, I'm sure you cover or you go through the steps that you went through to navigate through those very difficult periods of your childhood, your teens, and then finding the help that you needed to overcome all of those limiting beliefs about yourself, correct?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and I also give a lot of exercises to help people along with those. There's another thing I think one would get out of reading the book, and that is understanding how these childhood challenges, how these traumas, wounds of childhood affect our ability to deal with life's challenges and translate into physical illness. Okay. So I describe that pathway, I think, pretty clearly. So, if you want to know, I had a heart attack some 12 years ago. I was heading down that road from the time I was a year old. And the miracle, and I've got a chapter on that in the book, the miracle is how well I survived and how that all went down. But the fact of the heart attack was totally predictable given my childhood, and then the habits that emerged from that childhood. So that, I think, is very interesting because, we know that stress is a factor in disease. Most people don't know exactly how, and what most people don't understand is how child rearing, the quality of that period, is a huge factor in our ability to deal with stress.
Right. So you had a heart attack.
Yes.
How old were you?
12 years ago, I was 61.
Wow, young.
Oh, yeah. They call it the widowmaker. The surgeon, the cardiologist was surprised to see me walking in. Do we have time for a 2-minute story?
Yes.
I had a heart attack in a hotel. It was extremely painful, intense. Took about 45 minutes before I doubled over and I couldn't lie down. I couldn't stand up for 45 minutes, but the pain was in my solar plexus. So I assumed it was a GI. I thought I had I'd been stretching the night before and I thought I'd yanked my esophagus out of my diaphragm. And I just sweated out. And I'm going to make a long story short here. Over the next 3 months, I did not see a cardiologist. I went to the mountains 3 times to snowshoe. I went on 3 airplane trips. I went to a doctor after about a month, and, it took him about a month and a half to go through x-rays of my GI system because I convinced him that that's where it was. And after 3 months, we ran out of hypotheses. I walked into a cardiologist's office. He said, "We better look, but you look too healthy. I doubt that we're going to find anything with your heart, but we better look." And when he did, he couldn't believe I was walking. My left ventricle was mostly not functioning. I had 3 arteries, coronary arteries, shut down, and I had a blood clot in the ventricle. And 3 months had gone by.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding.
You had a heart attack and you went 3 months before you realized that's what it was?
Chapter 13 of the book, there's a subsection called Why I Didn't Die.
Oh, man.
You got to read that. It's just this story in a little bit more detail, but it's only about 3 pages. And not only did I not die, but after 3 months after the surgery, my heart muscle was completely back to normal.
This has to be a testament to your diet and exercise routine.
See, here's what the point I'm trying to make. It's a testament to my understanding of what health is. Diet and exercise are parts of it. Important? Yes, but parts. It also has to do with the quality of the tissues, the quality of the structure, and the quality of the movement of the body, and the quality of the emotional, spiritual life.
Right.
That's the whole point. Right there, I think we've summarized it.
Beautiful. Can you just give us maybe 1 or 2 of the exercises that you talk about in the book?
Oh, yes, I can. I can give you one. For example, take an area in your life, in one's life, that's not working. A typical one is relationships. And draw 2 columns. In one column, put what I believe to be true. And in the second column, put what I want to be true.
Ooh.
And in the first column, let it come to you. What do I really believe? For example, do I really believe that somebody will stay with me if I get close to them? Okay, because a very common belief, if I get close to somebody, they'll leave.
Uh-huh.
If I get close to somebody, I'll be suffocated.
Mm-hmm.
If I get close to somebody, I'll lose my freedom. Okay?
Uh-huh.
Those kinds of beliefs. Let them come to you, engage it. Just, let your subconscious mind begin to do some work with it. It's hard to get to rationally often because these are programs in the internal human computer that have been embedded by the time we're 3, 4, 5 years old. And so if, you start to bring those to the light and then say, okay, what belief would I prefer to have? And then comes the courageous part. You have to test those beliefs. You have to work to get close to somebody and sweat it out, because everything in your system is telling you they're going to leave if you get close. I mean, that's what's always happened ever since I was 2 years old or, whatever. But you're going to sweat and you test it and you open up and you tell the truth about it. You express the vulnerability that brings forth. And you work with it, and that's how you work with these limiting core beliefs.
That's one of the things that I encourage my sponsees to do. Great exercise, by the way. It's different than the way I paint the picture. But in many cases, you get stuck, right? You're either stuck in a bad relationship or you're stuck in a bad job or you're just stuck, right? And so, I say, well, why don't you do this, right? And they're like, no, I can't do that. Oh, well, why don't you try this? No, I can't do that. They've already created their own limiting beliefs about the situation, and they're stuck. And then I say, well, I'll tell you what. Let's say you found a genie in a bottle, and you had a wish, okay? And he said, okay, in this particular scenario, you can decide what scenario you would like. What is your perfect outcome? If this was a perfect world, what would you like the outcome to be? And in many cases, they have a hard time even talking about what their perfect scenario would be, because it's so difficult to, that's ridiculous. It's never going to happen. So why even engage? Why even entertain it? But it's one of the exercises that I've used in my life to get from point A to point B sometimes. Because when I get stuck, I have to ask myself, well, if it was a perfect world in my perfect world, where there was no consequences and there was no effort needed for me to acquire X, what would my perfect scenario be? And the first time I did that, it was difficult. But after that, I realized, because I would make some decisions from that, I remember going, you know what? I think I can do this. I don't know what it was, but it was just the exercise of doing it that started to churn and set something free, like loosen that hold the limiting beliefs had on me. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And it's that action, that doing something that contradicts them. And that takes courage and often support.
I 100% agree. That's great newcomer material, because you come in so rigid, absolutely rigid. You're beaten, you're defeated, and you really don't have much hope. And so taking suggestions, really, that's the best thing that you can do for yourself, because every decision you've made up until that point has led you to me, possibly. And so, that being the last house on the block, so to speak, if you choose to follow the suggestions based on, even my own experience, your experience, right? Like, we've walked down these roads. We know what it's like to have this mindset, to have these limiting beliefs, to go through childhood trauma and to heal from them, and what it was it took us to do those things. So I think it's a great, great exercise. I love it. So Don, let me ask you this, as we're talking about suggestions. What is the best suggestion you have ever received?
A couple of them come to mind, and one of them is, "This too shall pass."
Yes.
That one stuck with me. I remember an older graduate student telling me that when I was going through a difficult emotional period. And I've employed that many times. I've recalled that suggestion, and just helped me harness the patience to keep going, knowing that there was light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, absolutely. It's something, and your journey did not include any 12-step recovery, correct?
Correct.
And yet everything we discussed so far directly correlates with 12-step recovery. That's something we tell people all the time. You know, when they're dealing with issues, it's like, this too shall pass. Like, I'm having this problem. This too shall pass. And this is a nice flip on the script on that one. It's like, but also remember, when things are really, really good, this too shall pass.
This too shall pass.
Yeah.
Right.
Change is constant. And
Right.
you have to flow. You know, I like what you were talking about in the beginning. Our bodies are primarily made up of water. So you have these fluid exercises. What is the name of those exercises again?
Continuum movement.
That's a first for me. I'm going to go ahead. I want to research that a little bit because I love the concept behind it.
The founder's name is Emily, spelt with an I-E, E-M-I-L-I-E, Conrad. Emily Conrad, Continuum Movement. It's extraordinary. She was almost non-human in her ability to move like a reptile if she wanted to.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think once you connect with Source, just like anything else, your body will just follow. You know, I think that the mind and body connection, that at first there's that disconnect. You're trying to move the body with your mind. I know this because I've tried to do yoga several times, and I give up because for me, it's so difficult. And they always tell you, you know, it's the repetitiveness and it's the practice. It's the practice that eventually allows you to connect mind, body, spirit together. Mm-hmm. Which I'm sure this is what is her name again?
Her name? Emily Conrad.
Yeah, this is what I'm sure Emily, as I'm sure you have discovered as well. Mm-hmm. I want to put that on the show notes now. So the name of this practice is, Continuum
Movement. Yes.
Continuum movement. And so other than, I'm going to list that on the show notes, folks, so you can go ahead. Is there a link that I can look that up?
You know, there are lots. Just continuummovement.com or Google or YouTube.
Great. I'm going to list, you know, and I'm going to try and find Emily here as well. You know,
also, if you look at my book, I've got all the reference to continuum movement, to the structural body work, to somatic education and Feldenkrais. I've got all those resources in there because I want people to know about them.
Beautiful. Now, other than your book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood, is there a book that impacted you in your life that you would recommend?
You know, one that keeps coming to mind that, you know, you might not think about it in terms of recovery, but it was very helpful when I read it many, many years ago, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Right. That was by
Stephen Covey.
Yes. Correct. That is a great book. Mm-hmm. If you could give our newcomers only one suggestion, or you could give them more than one, what would that be?
1, have faith. Have faith. Trust. 2, don't try to be normal. Try to be who you are meant to be. In other words, don't compare yourself to any, you know, mythological standard of normality, whether it's established by the mental health profession or by the entertainment industry. Find out who you are and be that.
Beautiful. I love it. That is a great suggestion. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
All right, Don, go ahead.
I've really enjoyed this conversation,
This has been lots of fun, Don. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, folks, we've now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thank you for joining us on the SHAIR Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.theshairpodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery